Dear ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon. My name is Olga and I represent the UK Department for International Trade based in Kazakhstan. When you were registering for this specific webinar, you have probably noticed that we are arranging a series of different sessions for mining companies dedicated to different subjects. And the theme of today's session is digital development, integrated operations, and as a result, outstanding performance improvement. A UK company who will be presenting today is called Stepchange Global. It is the world's leading company who provides digital services for existing operations to improve their efficiency. And so I would like to introduce Tony Edwards, Chief Executive Officer of Stepchange Global and co-founder of this company, who has extensive experience in oil and gas industry, in particular exploration and production worldwide. Tony had a 17 years experience with BP and was a founder member of BP's Integrated Operations Program. In 2009, Tony decided to run his own business and he co-founded Stepchange Global. And since then, he has advised such major oil and gas companies as Statoil, BP, Petronas, ConocoPhillips, Total, ExxonMobil, and others. It is also important to mention that Stepchange Global has a representative office in Russia, which is very handy for many markets in our region in terms of proximity and in terms of the language spoken. Today, Tony will be joined by two of his colleagues, Nick Gibson and Pavel Chintsov. And before I hand over to Tony for his presentation, I would like to quickly outline the agenda for today. So Tony will present with several slides on his company and their operations. Then we will have a brief Q&A session, which will be followed by another longer presentation with a video. After that, again, you will have an opportunity to ask your questions to Tony and his team, and then we will have a networking opportunity, which will run in a separate virtual meeting room. So now over to you, Tony. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Olga. First of all, I'd like to thank Olga and her team and Arthur and his team in the Minex group for facilitating this today. It's a great pleasure for us to be here and to convey our experience in digital transformation and integrated operations in both oil and gas and mining. Primarily today, we're going to be focusing on our experience of application of digital to mining and in particular remote and integrated operations. Olga already outlined the contents. We're going to introduce Stepchange Global, who we are and what we do. We're going to cover a few digital transformation key concepts, as we find this is very useful for getting a common language and common understanding of what it takes to do this in an oil and gas or a mining company. We're then going to give some examples of work that we've delivered primarily in the mining area, and then we're going to move on a little bit to what the implications are for the COVID-19 and what we've been going through recently, and why remote operations and digital transformation is a hot topic and actually is part of the solution for that. And then we'll give some conclusions and wrap up as we go along. We will have a couple of Q&A sessions, so we'll try and break this up as we go along. First of all, a little bit about Stepchange Global. We've been up and running for nearly 12 years now. The core of the team spun out of BP and BG, where we'd actually been doing digital transformation since 2003. We have a long history of doing these integrated operation centers, which I'll tell you a lot more about later in the presentation. But in fact, we were actually doing this inside BP between 2003 and 2007. When the first wave of digital oil and gas was implemented. We are a global company. We run with a virtual network worldwide, and we carry out work all over the world. We have some experience working in oil and gas in Kazakhstan and Russia, but we also have mining experience from Australia, Chile, and Canada, which I'll take you through today. As I said, we're very, very fortunate in having a fantastic client list, and we can get you references from any of the work that we've done over the last 10 years. We've been very fortunate to work with many great companies. Initially, when we set the company up, we were fortunate to work with companies like Statoil, ConocoPhillips. We've done a lot of work in Australia. We've done a lot of work in Canada. We've done work for Petronas in Malaysia. But as you can see on this slide, we've in 2012 we got asked to support the BHP IROC implementation, which we'll tell you a lot more about later, in Perth. And from there, we've done a series of work, a series of studies and implementations with BHP in South America and indeed in Canada. We've also done work with other mining companies such as Barrick Gold, Teck Resources, and Caserones. So we've been very fortunate to transfer our knowledge and skills from oil and gas into mining. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the similarities and differences as we go along. Our main capabilities, I mean, what we primarily do is we work with operating companies to develop digital transformation strategies, programs, and pilots. And our main focus is on how you actually implement in operations. Most of us have got an operations background. Most of us have actually run operations or run drilling operations, that sort of thing. So we understand the practical implementation of trying to implement digital technologies in frontline operations. And I would say very much this is what makes us different from the larger consultancies, which are more generic and general. We do integrated operations center design and implementation, and we're going to tell you a lot about that later. We do digital technology advisory services, but we are agnostic and independent of technology suppliers. So we can independently advise you on what you need rather than what somebody wants to sell you. And we see that as one of our key differentiators. We primarily are interested in how these technologies get used. What do you do with the data and information that's going to make a change in the day-to-day operation of your site? How you run production, how you run maintenance, how you run integrity, how you do planning, all of those kind of things. How do these digital technologies, which there are now many, how do they enable you to do things differently in your day-to-day operations? And we see this very much as a people, process, and organizational change. This is digital technology is the enabler, but it's really about how you change the way you work. And this is one of the key learnings from the early days of implementing these approaches in oil and gas companies. And we see exactly the same in mining operations. And, you know, one of the things that we see is the trick to making the most of your digital technology spend is aligning your organization. And that's the thing that we focused on. So how do you get these technologies embedded in your frontline operations? And, you know, that leads on to a number of different things like, you know, how do you look at minimum staffing in your operations, and how do you do as much work as you can remotely, where there's the synergies of actually potentially supporting multiple mines or multiple operations at the same time. We do a lot of assessments. So what we have developed over the last few years is a way of coming in, looking at your operation and saying, what's the opportunity for you to enable digital in your day-to-day operations, and what's the value of doing that? And we've developed a lot of these health checks and assessments. So if you have an integrated operations center already up and running, but you don't think you're getting as much value out of it as you could be, we can come in with a small team of 2 or 3 people for 2 to 3 weeks and tell you how you can improve the performance of that integrated operations center. And we see a lot of that. Typically, you know, people who are setting these centers up have not seen or lived or worked in them before, and therefore it's very difficult for people to set these centers up well when they've not seen or worked in them before. And we've had the experience of 40, 50 of these centers worldwide, including many in mining. And we do a bunch of other of these assessments, minimum manning assessments. The thing that we've developed recently is remote operations and digital enablement benchmarking. So we can look at one of your operational assets and say, how are you comparing to industry best practice and industry average for running your operation remotely and digitally enabled, and what technologies you've got, what processes are being enabled by those technologies, and what's your organizational alignment. So I won't go into that anymore, but if you are interested in this, we are happy to take you through this. I'm going to talk a lot today about our integrated operations center experience. We believe we're the world leader in designing these centers. We've been fortunate enough to work with many companies globally on these, and we've designed and implemented many of the largest centers there are around, including the BHP IROC, including the BHP Escondida Center in Santiago. We've also done centers for oil and gas companies like BP. And so we see that we design these centers around your vision of the way you want to work, the processes you want to run in them, your organizational model, but most importantly, your culture and how your culture in your company and your local country runs. So we see that you can learn things from Chile, you can learn things from Australia and transfer them to other regions, but you do need to modify them to the local context. And we're very very keen that this is not one size fits all, and that you need to adapt these approaches and these concepts to your specific conditions and your culture and your organization. We have a proven way of designing these centers, which I'll come on to. I think one key thing is that we want to make these beautiful places to work. We see these as a way of attracting the next generation of people into oil and gas and mining in particular, and for these to be really transformational spaces where all of the latest technologies get used: analytics, machine learning, digital twins, a lot of the remote video analytics. This is where everything comes together. I won't go through this too much, but we've done a lot of these centers globally, worldwide, a lot in Australia, a lot in North America. And as you can see, there's a number of them which are mining centers in BHP and Barrick. Some of these centers can be 1 or 2 floors with 200 people working in them. Some of them can be very small centers with 10 or 15 people in them. At one end of the spectrum, they can cost millions of dollars, or even tens of millions of dollars. And at the other end of the spectrum, they can cost as little as $100,000 or even less. And in fact, the smallest one we've done is this one here with Huntley, and it's for a company that currently only has three wells. So they've decided to set their entire company up around this concept. So really, what is integrated operations, digital mine of the future, whatever you want to call it, digital transformation? Well, it's about taking these digitally enabled technologies, high bandwidth comms, Internet of Things, cloud, mobile worker, analytics, robotics, automation, etc., and applying them to your day-to-day operation. How do you apply them to production optimization? How do you apply them to asset integrity? How do you apply them to quality, water management? What the normal day-to-day processes that you have when you're running a complex mining operation or a complex oil and gas operation. And really, they are enablers for things like operations excellence, production excellence, remote operations and management, collaborative working, and for all those things that we do in a day-to-day operation. But when you look at this and you boil it down, you say, well, what's fundamentally in the change in the way of working that you have? And that change in the way of working is a number of things. So if you apply these technologies to an operation, and if you walked in through the door or you went to visit the operational site, what would the changes be that you would notice? One is that decisions, you're moving to a real-time or near real-time way of working, and decisions will be being made faster rather than they would have been in a non-collaborative, non-data enabled operation. We would see that there is real-time connectivity between one or more remote sites and teams working together over geographical distances. So the geography goes away. We tend to see that there's a move towards multidisciplinary team working, so that a production optimization team would be pit to port, and that is inherently multidiscipline, and those teams would be co-located with all of their data feeds, optimizing that production chain, and that really leads to value chain integration and optimization. So what we see is it speeds things up, it connects remote teams, it moves towards multidiscipline, it integrates across the value chain. And this is quite a big change in the way of working for your people on the ground, who are often isolated in silos, who are not used to collaborating in this way and that working. And so that's why this is a change problem. It's not just a technology problem, it's a change problem. What are the drivers and what are the enablers for doing this? Well, we see that the drivers are, things like, mines and oil and gas are increasingly remote locations where you don't have a lot of people to work there. There are particularly key skill shortages in certain areas. There's increasing technical and challenging technical nature of the operations and the new developments. Of course, you're trying to potentially grow your business. So how do you scale your business with the same number of people? You're looking for performance improvement, production efficiency, reduction of cost base, of course. You've got other things like high and low commodity price and the whole HSE and environment issue there, and driving us towards a digital type of operation. And of course, the enablers are a whole lot of the technologies which I've already talked about. But we also see that an enabler is new supply chain management models, new operating models, new project concepts, and new organizational models. So we're beginning to see these integrated operation centers or integrated remote operation centers in mining, where the mine is remotely controlled and there's remote dispatch from a city center location, and that's a new operating model, and a lot of your processes then need to be changed for that new operating model. We do see some similarities and some differences between oil and gas and mining. We see that in mining, it's often more about the value chain and integrating the production value chain, because many of the operating companies own the entire value chain. And so that's a big opportunity. There is a tendency towards full remote control rather than just operations and engineering support. Production planning is the key focus, and there's a lot of condition-based monitoring going on as well. I mean, in oil and gas, it tends to be more standalone operations, especially in the offshore environment. It's more of a support model, with operations engineering support around maintenance and planning is being the key area. And it's a lot more about uptime, particularly, and keeping the plant up, online, and available. We do see a lot of similarities. We see that oil and gas companies and mining companies are large, complex organizations. We see that they're often siloed. We see that there are barriers to implementing, cultural and organizational barriers to implementing these new ways of working. Doing things like production and maintenance planning is actually pretty similar. Both have turnarounds, for instance. There's a lot of focus on the new technology in both. So we actually see that there's a lot that can be learned from mining into oil and gas, and from oil and gas into mining. Where does the value come from integrated operations? I mean, we've got, and the application of digital technologies, we've got a lot of case studies on this, and we can talk to you about the sorts of value that we've seen others achieve. But conceptually, it happens from a number of things, right or real-time decision-making, faster decision-making. It's about including the best people in your decision-making, which is the connection of one or more remote sites. It's about taking that value chain integration approach and optimizing the entire value chain and not just one part of it. And it's applied to maximizing uptime, upset and event recovery, etc., etc. And we see that to do this, you need to focus not only on technology, but people, process, and organizational change as well. We've got a lot of examples where, particularly in the integrated operations centers area, the payback is typically 3 to 12 months. And usually it's within a year. And we've got a lot of examples of that we can share with you at a later date. One of the key concepts we see is this idea of measurement to decision lifecycle. So if you measure data and you have sensors on your plant and equipment in the field, you then need to transmit that data and information and store that data and information. And up until, you know, even a few years ago, this was very expensive to do and technically quite challenging. But we now see, with the advent of, you know, cheap and available high bandwidth comms and the cloud storage, that this is, you know, this as a barrier has practically disappeared in many places. Now, there are always locations where this is still a challenge, but often this is going away fairly rapidly. We then see, okay, you've got this data and information, what do you do with it? This is the analyze part, and this is where we see a lot of the machine learning and analytics data lakes and all of this coming into, you know, building understanding and identifying an opportunity to do something new. But at the end of the day, you've got these people with all the latest whiz bang technologies, you know, but at the end of the day, somebody's got to make and take a decision to do something different in the field that improves your performance. So how do you take and implement a decision? And we see that often the barrier to doing this is a lack of trust between the people in the field, in the mine, who have a high degree of situational awareness of what's going on, and the people in the office who are actually analyzing the data. And, you know, typically you have some very highly educated, very technology aware people making these decisions and working with the data here, and you have guys who are wearing hard hats and swinging spanners and doing the day-to-day operations in the field. So how do you bridge this gap? And most often when we see digital implementations in mines and oil and gas fail or not deliver the value that they should do, the reason is there's a lack of trust between the office and the operational site. If we unwrap that ring, you basically get a stack, and this is like a technology stack where you've got data capture and storage, communications, information visualization, information analysis, which would include analytics and machine working. It's how do you apply that to a work process or a workflow? There's a level of a collaborative working which is needed. There's organization and governance. There's i.e. how do you make and take decisions. There's change management, leadership and training, and then how do you take a decision and implement that and get an action. And what we see is that breaks down into boxes of people, process, organization and technology, and that is a change management problem. It's not a technology project problem. It's not an implementation, an IT implementation problem. This is a change management problem. So how do you get your people to work differently based on the fact that you've got this data and information? Now, the issue is you don't have one of these stacks, you have a multiple set of these stacks. So if you look across a mining value chain, mining, crushing, concentrator, filters, transport, port potentially, and this is something we did for a mine in a copper mine in Chile, you see multiple stacks. And what we see going on is that there's a tendency to try and optimize and use analytics and use data and information for these kind of vertical integrations. And you absolutely need to do this. But but they're really only tackling one part of the value chain. And typically they are technology specific. So things like autonomous trucks would be an example of that. But one of the things that we've learned from working with, you know, the mining implementations with these IOCs, specifically for something like the BHP IROC in Perth, that the important thing is to integrate in the horizontal and integrate along the value chain. Now, this is more difficult, but it's higher value. So really, it's important to distinguish between vertical integration and horizontal integration. So at that point, I'm happy just to take some questions. We've got some. If not, we can move on to the next section.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you. It's very impressive, and I can see we have the first question now. Speaking about remote operation, do you see it as a future global trend?
Yes, we can already see it happening. I mean, certainly in oil and gas, we did some work last year where there's a company that's looking at regional centers. So they're saying, okay, why can't we remotely support operations and engineering support for all of our African offshore oil and gas assets? We've already seen one and been involved in one oil company that has a global center for drilling. So it supports all of its drilling operations, which at any one time might be more than 50 or 60 wells at any one time from a single center here in London. So absolutely, we see that. We also see a move towards what I would call a peer group model, where instead of having an organization based on geography, i.e. South America, North America, Africa, Asia, that you have an organization that's based on asset type. So we're beginning to see the signs that the bigger international companies may be moving towards a model which is we have a set of copper mines, we have a set of iron ore mines, and we support them regardless of where they are in the world. So absolutely. And by the way, COVID-19 have just made this more important. I think you want to minimize the number of people in your operations there, and do as much as you can remotely to protect the people in the front line. So yes, absolutely. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tony. And based on your experience, do you see that oil and gas companies mostly switching to digital operations? More than the mining ones, so it's more or less equal.
No, so I think oil and gas companies started earlier. So if you look at companies like BP and Statoil, that was Equinor, Shell, Chevron, Saudi Aramco, most of these companies, and ConocoPhillips, most of these companies kicked off their digital transformation programs in 2002 or 2003, 2004, in that sort of timescale. And the first wave of digital enablement happened between 2003 and say 2010 to 12 with those big companies. What we see now in oil and gas is every company is doing it, even the very, very small ones. So the price point has reduced a lot. It used to be 10 years ago, you had to have pretty deep pockets to do this. Now that's just not the case. The barrier to entry is much lower. And also that we see that, in mining companies, obviously the initial leaders a few years ago were Rio Tinto and BHP and the bigger companies. But again, I think we expect to see the trend to go to more towards more smaller companies. Nick, did you want to say something?
I did want to come in there just to point out that, or just to remind you that the large international oil companies and even the smaller players have gone through technology refresh or redevelopment cycles, because that you get to a new way of working with digital integrated operations, and people are very, very inventive and very, very clever, and they go, now we're doing this, how do we do the next step? So it's an iterative process is the key observation.
Yeah. So just to answer this question from a technical point of view, what equipment and software is needed to utilize the technology? I mean, that's a very interesting question at the moment. I think certainly in oil and gas, and I would say to an extent in mining, we see that a lot of operations have already got data and information, and they're already got some data, and they're already storing it and already have the ability to visualize it. What we see is most people are not using that data and information as well as they should do. There's still an opportunity to do the digital basics first and get that right, and make sure you transform your operation. We also see that a lot of people are jumping onto the more advanced digital technologies like analytics and machine learning, expecting that to solve all of their problems without doing the basics first. So again, the learning from the original BHP IROC was that actually all they did was lift and shift the technology they already had, and just by co-locating and looking at the workflow and processes around the floor, they got huge value without too much in the way of, well, they didn't have analytics. They didn't have digital twins because it was done in 2012, 2013. So I think there is a maturity model in here about getting the basic technologies up and running, get connected, then collaborate around those initial technologies, get the data and information, be able to store it, be able to visualize it, get an IOC set up, be able to make decisions between your operational site and your center. And then the IOC becomes the hub for all of the new advanced technologies such as digital twins, drones, mobile working, analytics, machine learning, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, Tony. There is one more question, please. Is there a pilot version available to test the technology first before purchasing the full package?
Yes, I mean, most companies have gone through pilots initially before ramping up and going to a full implementation. It's very, very common. And in fact, we would advise that you take a mine or an operation that could be a pilot, potentially one that's already got some digital enablement, it's got some good communications, it's got some data capture, it's got some data visualization all up and running, and almost just start, use that as a pilot and do what we call earn and learn, earn some money, get some value, and learn how to do this in your own organization, and then look at how you scale it and sustain it. What I would say is most companies can do pilots with that, and they can show the benefits. Scaling and sustaining this is not easy. And in fact, we've even seen a trend in oil and gas where assets which had integrated operation centers 10 years ago, they haven't had the care and attention that you would hope, and they've faded away. They've actually gone backwards. So yes, absolutely, piloting is a good way to go. You probably need a vision for where you want to get to, but I think just starting with what you've got and focusing on the people, process, and organizational change with the technology you've already got is a good way to go.
Thank you. And let's take one more question, because before we proceed to the second part of your presentation, at what stage of the project is it better to implement your technology?
So is that a greenfield project or a brownfield operation? Do we know? I mean, I think, if it's a brand new mine and you're looking to develop a brand new mine, you cannot start early enough on this. You have to start with what's your vision and operating model for how you're going to run this mine, remote and real time, with a suite of technologies which are going to affect the way you run this mine. So you need that set of operating principles and operating model up first, and then it's what are the technologies that are going to enable that model and those operating principles. Too often we see that people focus on the technology and then it's a technology looking for a home. It's looking for something. You should start with the outcome. What is the operational improvement that you're really trying to make? And certainly we've seen in oil and gas that there's a temptation to use a very complex, expensive hammer to solve a very often a simple problem that can be solved a different way. So you can do an awful lot with what currently would look like a relatively basic set of digital technologies. Okay, good.
Okay, thank you, Tony. And shall we now move to the second part of your presentation, please?
Thank you. So you can still see my presentation?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So now I'd like to focus on integrated operation centers, and we believe that integrated operation centers is where a lot of these digital technologies come together. It's where the decisions are made. It is bridging the gap between the office and the operations in the field. It's about enabling remote control and remote operations and engineering support. It's about where the optimization of the value chain happens. It's about enabling, it's where a lot of these other technologies happen, like machinery monitoring, plant and equipment monitoring. But it should also be the first port of call. So, you know, one of the things we often see in operations is that there's no clear communications protocol between the guys in the field and the guys in the office, and it's kind of everybody talking to everybody. And what the center does, it becomes the conduit, it becomes the mainstream through which your communication happens. So it becomes the first place that the field comes to get help. It also becomes the first place where anyone in the office goes to find out what's going on in the field. And it enables this concept of situational awareness. So understanding, you know, so that the people in the office, in the IOC, have as much understanding of what's going on in the day-to-day operations as the guys in the field, or as much as they can have without actually being there. So, you know, this is one of the key things that we see, and why these integrated operation centers are now very common in oil and gas, and are becoming increasingly common in mining operations. We have an agile development and implementation process, which is laid out here. Discovery, vision, operating model concept, operating model selection, and then, you know, you have the idea of what's the functions and capabilities which are going to run, what are the workflows and processes that are going to run in the center, what's the technology solutions you need, and what's the organization, design and governance. And I can't stress how important this last one is. Most often when we see these centers not running well, it's because they don't have organizational alignment for the new operating model. In terms of designing the integrated operations center, you know, we develop a basis of design. We then do an IOC design, and of course there's construction, IOC move in and go live, and this change management is almost continuous in parallel to this. Now, this time scale to do this, you know, we have seen it done very fast in small operations, where it can be done in probably 3 months, 10 to 12 weeks. Typically in a larger mining operation or a larger oil and gas operations, you're talking 9 to 12 to even 15 months to go through this, if you're talking about a large center with a few hundred people. Now, when you're doing the kind of the basis of design, there's a couple of things that we do. One of the things that we did for a BHP subsurface mine in Canada was do some critical interface analysis. So one of the things that was identified was that you could optimize any one of these operations in the value chain, but actually focusing on the interfaces between these was actually where a lot of value was. And therefore, this is one of the inputs into how you lay out your IOC and how you design your IOC and what processes are going on in your IOC. One of the things you do have to make a decision on is, you know, whether you go to remote operation and full control. We are tending to see mining operations go to full control. It's less common in oil and gas operations, and that's primarily due to a lifetime issue. Many mature oil and gas operations may only have 10 or 15 years left on their lifetime, so moving the control room can be quite expensive potentially. So you know, what's the drive for doing this? But also there's this collaboration decision support layer, which is more around engineering and planning, but also you can have an expert and management support layer as well. And we do see the center of excellence evolving in oil and gas and mining companies, where they have a center of excellence on a certain process or on a certain technology. Whereas as you farther you go down this diagram, the more asset specific it becomes. So understanding where your IOC wants to be and the difference between a center of excellence or an expert center, an operations and engineering support center, and a full remote control center is very, you need to understand that. This is a bit of analysis that we did for a copper mine in Chile a number of years ago, Caserones. So they were looking at what was the traditional model of controlling packages of equipment in the field, and how would you consolidate that local control and what would have been 5 or 6 disparate control rooms? How would you consolidate that back into a single control room in Santiago? And so this was the analysis that was done. You know, at the top level, you've got what are each of the control room operators going to control. Then you've got people who are supporting the water management cycle, the energy management cycle. There are people looking at end-to-end production optimization and planning. Then there's maintenance and engineering support, and then you've got the kind of the other levels of support, like integrated planning, IT and data quality, etc., etc. So again, it's important to understand this for the basis of design for your center. Again, you know, there's a kind of before and after in terms of value chain integration, you know, multiple mines to rail to port. I mean, this is typically what's done in Western Australia for their iron ore mines. And, you know, there's the situation before where they were run as isolated or relatively isolated operations, and there was the normal siloed organizational model. And of course, when you go to the you know, the new model, it's about pit to port optimization. It's about looking at the value chain. It's about standardizing your processes and procedures. And interestingly enough, it's a way of recruiting and keeping your best personnel. Certainly one of the drivers for having these centers in Perth rather than at mine locations was actually being able to have the right retaining and attracting the right people. I mean, here's another one for the copper mining value chain. I won't go through this at the moment, but similarly, you know, the situation before and, you know, what you can get to afterwards. Where are we? Our agile design approach, I won't go into this very much, but essentially, once you've got the basis of design, we run a series of sprint workshops to actually design a center for you in your actual building. We can also help you select the building as well. And typically we design these centers over a 2 to 3 week period with a workshop every day with layouts updated overnight. So a 2 to 3 hour workshop in the morning, layouts are updated overnight in London, and then we carry on. And we typically do 50 plus drawings. The last one we did over 100 drawings to get optimized. So, you know, and we are right down the level of who sits next to who, where the coffee machine is, where the printer is, and you know, all of the teams that are going to live in this center get an input to the design. And we've been developing this this design approach for over 10 years. You know, we were doing it in this way before Agile was a concept, would you believe? So again, we can do this for you. Typically, this is a small mining layout. This is typically what you get, but you see discrete areas for control, discrete areas for maintenance and engineering, production, planning. In this case, there's a viewing area, there's an event area, there's huddle rooms, there's a kitchen area, there's other areas as well. So this is, you know, how you take the basis of design in what you want to run in the center into transform it into a layout. I mean, this layout did actually take 50 or 60 drawings to do, and in actual fact we ended up extending the building because the building ended up too small. A little bit about some of the implementations we did. This is the first piece of work we did in mining, which was for BHP IROC in Perth. We actually got asked to come in and do an insurance piece of work. So they had a big project team designing and implementing this, and we got asked to come in and do a piece of work. We took one look at the layout of the design that they'd done and said this won't work, and then we were asked to redesign the layout. And what you see here is each of these green horseshoes is a mine, 1, 2, 3, 4 mines. You've then got a rail area, and you've got a port in and port out. The pink guys are into mine management team, and the purpley guys are integrated planning. And so what you see is that the actual layout of this center reflects the geography in the field and the fact that you've got 4 mine assets and a rail asset and a port asset. Interestingly, you know, the value case, the business case for this center was 1 extra train of iron ore every month at 4 to 5 million of value of a train of iron ore. By the end of month 5, they were doing 1 extra train of iron ore every 3 to 4 days. This centre paid for itself in less than 6 months, quite easily. And by the way, this was done in 2013 without analytics and without a lot of the latest technologies. It was just looking at lifting and shifting the current systems and co-locating them in the room. I'm conscious I'm going to need to move on. This is the centre we designed for BHP Escondida a couple of years ago. It's now been up and running for about just under a year, or around a year. And this is pictures of it when I was there this time last year when it was being commissioned. What you see here is 39 control desks for Escondida, plus all the production optimization, planning, and all the support. And then this one is the Spence mine here. And this is how we take the initial basis of design, which is come up with internally, and we translate it into the to this is what you see here. This is the latest one we've done in Chile, which is Tech Resources for the QB2 mine. We actually got asked to help select the building, which was good. We actually selected a really great building with the core on the outside. So if you look at this one here, the core's in the middle, so it's hard for these guys over here to collaborate with these guys over there. There's no visual connectivity. What you see in this one is the core's at one side, and we did this layout. This one's currently under construction. What you see here is every roll, and there are approximately, I think it's 98 rolls on the floor. Every roll has got a location, and we know exactly why every roll is sat next to which person. And so we're at that level of detail after running workshops for 2 weeks. And as you can see here, there's a lot of breakout and huddle rooms. These are the 3D visualizations that we've got, which just show what it's actually going to look like. Control areas in the middle. Then we got mechanical maintenance and planning, medium-term maintenance, systems engineering, electrical maintenance, mobile maintenance, production. Here was reliability engineering. So every team has got a specific space that's designed for them. Again, this is the Barrick Gold one. Again, this is a smaller IOC for a gold mine in San Juan, Argentina. So I won't say too much about this one, but if we could go to the video, please, that would be great.
Bridging the gap between your mine and office, continuous field support, real-time monitoring, and advanced analytics. Welcome to the future of mining. Welcome to Veladero's Integrated Remote Operations Center in Albardón, San Juan Province, Argentina. The IROC symbolizes the new mainstream model of mining. Collaboration, combined with the latest in mining innovation, transformed this facility into a truly advanced center for the integration of mining and advanced data analytics. A demonstration of our commitment to investing in innovation in the region, the IROC is the first of its kind in the company, developed by San Juan for Argentina. The remote monitoring model enhances our capacity to anticipate events, allowing us to maximize production while reacting faster to changes in the field, providing confidence in our strategic decision-making capabilities. The IROC positions San Juan to pioneer innovation and mining development in the region. Our success will ensure mining continues to be a positive force for economic development in the province for the foreseeable future.
Thank you. And if you can just switch back to my slides, what that video is available on YouTube, by the way, if you want to go and look at it. And what you can see there is that that company is putting the IOC at the center of their digital enablement program. It's where the decisions are getting made. I'll just very quickly go through a few others. Here's a US midstream oil and gas operation. We designed this center 5 or 6 weeks ago. And again, it's got a full control capability plus all the operations and engineering support, and you can see that all of the different desks are colored for different teams. Again, this one took 80 or 90 drawings and was designed over a 2-week period. This is a much smaller one, different scale. This is actually Repsol for a shale gas operation in Pennsylvania. You know, the total cost of this project I think was about $200,000 to get this fully implemented and up and running. You know, this is a UK-based global drilling center. So this is a large center with all the drilling and well delivery people on board, and they're monitoring all of the wells globally, worldwide. Here's some smaller ones that we've done in oil and gas over a number of different periods. One's in Malaysia, a couple of them in Canada, some in Australia, one in Trinidad. You know, the ConocoPhillips one that we did, it paid 3 times its cost back in 1 year. So I think the total cost was 4 to 5 million to implement it, including the IT systems. And it paid back $15 million worth of value in 1 year, in year one. The one in the top you see in the left-hand corner, you probably just see where my cursor is. You can see some people briefly with blue shirts. Those people are actually sat in the middle of Australia, and this centre is actually in Adelaide. So one of the things that we do is we try and make people think that they're collaborating together in the same room. Just a couple of things here, a couple more slides to go. You know, the changes that we see with integrated operations and digital enablement and IOC. You know, you move from processes which are serial to being more parallel. There's a tendency to move from single discipline to multidisciplinary teams. Work becomes independent of geographical location, or a lot of the work does. Obviously, the physical work that you do in the field still needs to be done there. You have decisions based on real-time data and experience, and not just experience, and it becomes more proactive and reactive. Just a quick slide on COVID-19. What we're seeing going on during the COVID-19 epidemic is that companies are being forced to work remotely anyway. And so this is an opportunity to prove to yourself that remote working can work. And so then the challenge is, how do you make this sustainable going forward? How do you capitalize on, you know, what is a crisis and say, actually, we can use this as a demonstrator, as a pilot, to flip our organizations to this new model. You know, and many operational sites will be minimum manned at the moment. There'll be less people there, people working remotely, people supporting from home. So how do you make that the new sustainable operating model? You know, and how do you challenge the work that's done at the operational site so that you can move towards, you know, people only being at the site if they wear a hard hat and swing a spanner and do something physical. You know, so we see that remote and integrated operation centers are a key enabler. You know, we've been actually busy working with companies, trying to understand how they can capitalize on what is clearly a you know, a crisis, but what maybe, you know, what can we get that could be a pilot or a lesson for the future that we can get out of this. Just some conclusions. You know, you know, if you're going to embark on digital transformation and integrated operations, you know, the idea, you know, one of the key learnings is, you know, that this is an organizational transformation. It's not a technology or an IT project. And the companies which are successful think about it in this way, and in fact think about it as continuous improvement process. You know, this is not one size fits all. So if somebody turns up and says, you know, we did this for this company in another part of the world, this is you know, this is the model of work for you. You know, just be very careful. Take the learnings, but you've got to do it your way. You've got to do it the way that works for your mind, your operation, your company, your culture, your region. I think that's really important. That's one of the other lessons learned from oil and gas. It is about the integration of people, process, technology, and organizational change. We see too often that there's a big focus on, let's get the technology up and running and working. Let's look at how some of the processes, but people don't engage with the people around the change, the change in the way they're going to work. And certainly they don't align the organizational models and the governance and incentivization, how you make decisions. It is about changing the way you work. That's really, and it's about changing the way that your organization work. The value is significant. I mean, we've got a lot of numbers to justify this that we can share with you later potentially. But typically these IOCs are 3 to 6 months, 6 to 12 months payback. And in actual fact, we've got cases in oil and gas where they paid for themselves before they've even opened their doors. So if this center with the data and information avoids one major outage, you can pay for your center almost in one foul swoop. The IOCs are where the technology comes together. It's where you're going to make the decisions. It's where you change the way your organization works. And I think it's important that as we get more and more of these digital technologies coming at us, that they need to be integrated and they need to be aligned into your organization. Otherwise, they're just disparate single technologies that get thrown at an operational site. I would also say that a lot of the gains that we've seen for remote operations and what we've learned from the early mining IROCs is a lot, most of the technology is already there. You don't need, and to do the digital basics is really important before you go to the really advanced technology stuff. So that's all I've got. Sorry, 5 minutes over. And I'll put my... So Olga?
Yes, thank you very much, Tony. It is really impressive. And I really liked what you said, that it's not a technology program, it is a change program. So the company who are interested in your technology, they really need to be prepared for entire change in order to ensure effective operation of their operational assets. That's really impressive. Thank you. And I think we have a couple of new questions. How could companies with several subsidiaries benefit from the technology?
So I think that's a good and interesting question. I mean, certainly with the large companies where they have a lot of operations in many different countries and operations of many different types, if you looked at it's easy to see in oil and gas companies, a BP or a Shell might have 50 operations worldwide, and some are gas and some are oil and some are offshore and some are onshore, and some have got 10,000 wells and some of them have got 10 wells, and so there's a huge variety in that. But I think you've got to pull out what's the common processes between what you do in each of your subsidiaries. So there are clearly going to be processes in a copper mine which are just for a copper mine. They're only applicable to a copper mine. So those processes and some of those digital enablement of those processes by technology will be specific to that asset type. There will then be other processes which are common to different asset types, whether it's an iron ore or a copper mine. The way you do planning, for instance, could be very common. And I think if you've got subsidiaries of different types and you've got a complex company, you've got to work out which things are common to those subsidiaries or those assets and which things are individual, are specific to those asset types, and have this, what we see is a layered model. So certainly we think of this in two ways. There are processes which are high touch and high context. So those are the ones which you have to be at the mine to do them. There are processes which are low touch and high context. And those processes are where you need to know a lot about the mine, but you don't need to be at the mine. And then the third set of processes are low context, low touch. And those could typically be, something around monitoring a piece of machinery, a pump or a truck. Now, does it matter if you're monitoring that truck? Does it matter if that truck is in Mongolia, or does it matter if it's in Canada? At the end of the day, you're still monitoring a truck, and whether it's in one country or another country doesn't make any difference. So I think you've got to break, if you want to do this, you've got to break it down into what's asset specific and what's can be applied across different types of assets.
Yes, thank you, Tony. Yeah, one more question. What is the cost of implementation and payback period of the project? I think you've mentioned it several times during your presentation, but probably not everyone got this information.
So I would say, of course, that is very dependent on the size and scale of your project. I mean, in oil and gas, we work with projects, operations where they're doing 10,000 barrels of oil a day, and we work with some where they're doing 200,000 barrels of oil a day. So obviously those business cases are very specific. But what I would say is that if you went to what I would call the digital basics enablement, which is having real-time data and information, being able to visualize it, store it, transmit it, and having an operations center where engineers and operators can analyze it and work with that data and information and maybe do some simple analysis, and you're going to build a center. I mean, the cost range is anything between, depending on how much data and information you've already got, could be anything from $200,000 to, $50 or $100 million. But typically we see that the cost of implementing is in the low millions. It's in $1, $2, $3, $4, $5 million. And typically the payback is 3 to 6 to 12 months. And in actual fact, in some cases, the percentage improvement that you have to make on cost reduction or production efficiency improvement is very low. And like I said, the story from the BHP IROC is they expected this center to take 18 to 24 months to pay for itself, and it paid for itself in 5 months. So, one of the things is to have we tend to do business cases where, what's the level of performance improvement you need to have to pay for this implementation, this center, this digital technology. And actually that can, in a big operation, that can be a relatively small improvement in terms of percentages. And then what's the typical improvement that we've seen other people do? And that's a much bigger number. And so you will get something, typically we'd say you get something between this and this range, between a P90 and a P50 outcome. And again, we had one center that we did in Azerbaijan a long time ago. I mean, the center was stood up and running before it even been officially opened, and it prevented an outage on an offshore oil platform that meant it paid for itself with one event before it even been opened. And we see the same with the mining centers. The payback can be very, very quick, as long as you don't just build a room and put technology in it and park people in there. You've got to do the change, the people and process change to get that up and running. How does technology address the minimum manning solution? I think that's again a very good question. I mean, I think if you're going to apply, say, analytics and machine learning to some equipment, and whether that's a truck or a conveyor belt or a pump or a compressor in oil and gas, at the end of the day, if you bought all this technology and you're doing the analysis, what's the payoff? And the payoff is, how many less maintenance techs do you need in the field? Now that's actually quite difficult to make that connection. We work with people in refining where they've been applying these kind of techniques for a long while, where they have norms for what's the reduction in maintenance man hours, you can see. But typically we do see in general that there's an awful lot of work done at operational sites which doesn't need to be done at the operational site. So there's an awful lot of people wandering around with notebooks gathering data off of pieces of equipment. There's awful lot of people looking at equipment and just doing rounds. So how do you eliminate that with technology and do it with remote working and with camera technology, for instance. So what we do is we do a digital opportunity assessment, and included in that would be an assessment of, you know, what your reduction in manning could be. What we do see, we can do that pretty easily in oil and gas operations. We did it for an operation offshore Angola recently and identified how to reduce the number of people on that FPSO by 50%. But those are very discrete operations. They are literally islands, and the number of people involved are typically a lot less than you might see at a big mine, which is more, you know, physically intensive. But certainly we have a process that says what work can be eliminated, what work can be transferred to somewhere else, what work can be optimized. So often, you know, there's a lot of work that can be transferred from the field into these operational centers. Good.
Thank you, Tony. I would like to remind to the audience that you can ask your questions using the comments bar under the main screen.
More?
Okay, I think, yes, no more questions so far I can see. So, dear participants, thank you for your participation in this meeting. Please follow the link to the virtual meeting room, where you will be able to ask further questions and continue your discussion with the participants. Thank you, and see you shortly.